All right, everybody. So though I introduced my new van, my 2006 Toyota Sienna all-wheel drive, a couple weeks ago, this is the official start of the build, and there's a lot I want to talk about. Just to kind of preload right up front here, my first steps for the build on this, I've done a number of things in the van, but my first big steps is going to be to put on a lift kit on this. I'm going to put a 3.5-inch lift on this van. And most of this video, I'm going to talk about that. Now, and that's essentially the first step for this build. There, of course, I'll be building out a camper and putting on solar and all kinds of other stuff, but that will come later. Now, I will do an installation video for this, the lift kit, and that should come out next week, or maybe at the latest 10 days from now or something. But I anticipate next Sunday or Monday. But let's get into this without too much more discussion, and I want to talk about the lift kit and some stuff I've learned, and since I've been assembling all the parts and prepping for this, just some things I want you guys to think about if you start to consider wanting to do a minivan, and particularly if you want to put the lift in it. Okay, so let me catch you guys up if you're not familiar. Yes, putting a lift kit on a van is a thing. And if you guys could see it right back there, that kind of, it's dark out, but you could see my white Sienna. I've already built a 2011 front-wheel drive Sienna camper build. I've taken it out, and I absolutely love it, and it is rapidly turning into one of my favorite platforms for a camper. Putting a lift, so on my white Sienna that you guys see back there, I put on a 2-inch lift, and even with it only being front-wheel drive, that 2-inch lift made all the difference, and that little Sienna there has really amazed me in terms of what you can do. So the one behind me, 06, this one is an all-wheel drive, and it's been a Nevada car all its life, so zero corrosion, or at least very little. It was a one owner, so I'm now the second owner. I had complete maintenance records for all of its life, and there was a few minor things that bothered me about it. The more and more I look at it, I'll talk about that in a moment. But for the most part, this is a really solid platform to build from. Now, it does have 159, or let's just say 160,000 miles, which is a lot of miles. And even I, under normal circumstances, wouldn't pick up a vehicle and build it out with that many miles. However, it is a Toyota, and these vans are arguably rated as some of the most reliable, if not the most reliable minivans out there. And vans just like this one behind me, a second-gen Sienna, there are many, many examples of these getting well into the 300,000. I've even heard a couple anecdotes of some of them getting into the 400,000 mile range. And from everything I could tell on this one is running good, it's running strong, and there should be no major problems. I'll show you guys later in the video. There were a few little sloppy mechanic things that I found, but I have pretty much, I think, remedied the vast majority of that. All right, so for the lift kits, I've already talked about, there's a company called Traxta that makes a 2-inch lift, and there is a company called Journeys that makes a 3.5-inch lift. Now, I'm going to pull out this box here in a minute, and I'm going to show you what's in the lift kit. I have zero association with Journeys, and as I stand right now, my opinion of the company is neutral, and I'll explain all that in a moment. Now, if you do know somebody out there who has put a lift on a minivan and you bring up Traxta and Journeys, particularly when it comes to Journeys, what I'm finding is that you're going to find one of two positions. You're either going to find people who say they love it and they would do it again, or you find people that say it's been nothing but a hassle. So what I did is I'm not a big Facebook guy, but I do follow some of the various enthusiast pages for the various rigs I have and things like that, most notably for mechanical knowledge. But I'm a member of I think it's called All-Wheel Drive Toyota Sienna Club, I believe it's called, and the other one is Lifted All-Wheel Drive Toyota Siennas. Two separate groups on Facebook. Both of them very sizable, pretty active communities. And a couple days ago, or close to a week ago, I posted the same question on both, and I asked users for their direct experience. I eliminated people who gave anecdotes but don't actually have any experience. But I asked for people who actually had installed the Journey's 3.5 lift on their van, and I asked them two questions. The very first question was, would they do the install again? And then the second question is really kind of examining, some of the biographical information about like how many miles they put on the vehicle, but most notably, what kind of problems, if any, had they had. And I didn't get it, I got it's all relative, but, I think I got, I guess I would have gotten somewhere around the mark of 12 responses between the two groups of people who had direct experience. I got a lot of anecdotal responses, but in terms of people who actually have these vans, I got 12 responses, and the split was 2/3. Meaning out of those 12 responses, 8 people had put the lift on their van, and they said that they would do it again. And there is some caveats to that. I'm going to talk about that. And 1/3, or 4 people, said that they did put the lift on their van, but it's been nothing but problems essentially, and they would not do it again. So I took a little bit of a deeper dive and tried to gather the best data I could. And basically, this is what I found. In terms of problems, and this is again for people who put the 3.5-inch Journey's lift on their Sienna, the most common problem by far was CV axle failure. And when I asked people about how many miles after the install they had CV axle problems, some had no problems. But when I averaged it up, it seemed as though about the average was after 28,000 miles after the install, most people reported having to replace their CV axles. Now that's an average. I want you guys to keep in mind there were some people who, I think there was one person who put, off the top of my head, like 70,000 miles on their van and had not had any problems. So it's not, but even among those that recommend, it was still a problem that came up a lot. Now, one caveat I want you to note is most of the vans that where people installed this 3.5-inch lift had well over 100,000 miles. There was only one van that had 70,000 miles on it, and there was only one van that was essentially new. She said she only had 5,000 miles on the van. But my point I'm trying to make here is, I'll give you a great example. That white Sienna, when I bought that, it needed a passenger side CV axle. That van has, 140,000 miles now, I believe, or somewhere around that ballpark. I replaced it when I put the lift in there. So my point is, considering a lot of these vans, when they put the 3.5-inch lift, already had over 100,000 miles, I do think the lift probably contributed to higher wear rates, but there was also a factor that those CV axles, just based on the age of the vehicle, would probably need to be replaced soon anyways. But it's something to note. Now, some people did report some driveline issues, or the drive shaft that would go from, they call it something else, but essentially the transfer case that Toyota has in these, back to the rear differential. A couple people, not as many as the CV axles, reported problems. But I think, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but I think I found some of the reasons why and a kit to mitigate those problems. That's a aftermarket kit for an aftermarket lift, that one being the Journey. But like I said, a lot of the people who said they would recommend it again, still reported they had CV axle issues. And it just is what it is. I don't think it's a guaranteed that they're going to happen, but for this particular van, I expect that's something might come up. So I don't know if he's the owner or the head tech, but there's a guy, I believe his name is Mike, who answers the phone for Journeys. It kind of seems like a one-man show from what I could see. To his credit, I did talk to him a number of times, both on the phone and via text. He's very responsive. And, I did bring up some of these concerns with him. And a couple of his suggestions were to repack the CV axles when you do the install, or if they're worn, of course, replace them. And repacking them involves basically removing the old boots, putting on new boots. You add some more grease, seal it all up, and go from there. And that's what I'm going to do on this one. In terms of some of the driveline problems, he stated that there's a bushing. It's a little hard to describe where. I'll show you guys in the next video, an install video, that kind of holds up the rear end of the differential for this particular car. He says that bushing commonly fails, and it can cause some rapid changes of driveline angle, and he recommends changing those, and I did, in fact, buy that. So, we'll see. One thought that I have, though, is I'm kind of, at this point, I'm committed to this. I bought all the parts and all the pieces. But, and I'm grateful and fortunate in the sense that this van will not be a daily driver I have to rely upon. I might drive it daily, but I have other vehicles. So if I don't expect to put an enormous amount of miles on here. And also, if I did run into a problem, I don't anticipate, it would leave me stranded. So I feel a little more confident. This is a very early assessment, and this is really only an assessment that I would consider personally. So I would probably not make any decisions off this, but maybe keep it in the back of your mind. If this were my only vehicle and I had no other vehicles to rely upon, and I needed this to get back and forth to work or do some other important task, I might be hesitant to put on the lift. Maybe that will come to be unfounded, that hesitancy, or maybe it will be justified, and that's something that I'll have to evaluate in time come. But that would be, I've thought about scenarios, but in my case, it's not my primary daily driver. Even when it's completely built out, I don't anticipate putting on, tens and tens of thousands of miles of. All right, so let's briefly go through the contents that comes with the Journey lift. I'm just going to kind of basically show this stuff off as I pull it out. So you do have to reposition the exhaust, and they include a couple pipe sections that seem to be of pretty good quality, and they include the clamps. I've not heard anyone complain about any of those exhaust issues. There's two of these brackets. These are the drop brackets. So one big difference between this Journey's lift and the Traxta lift, which I did in the other Sienna, is on this one, the rear swing arm, I guess you would call it a trailing swing arm. You actually install these brackets. So these will go in the original mount, and then it will drop the swing arm. On the Traxta, you did not have to do that. I think dropping that that swing arm is probably a good thing, and I've not really heard anyone complain about that. Now, let's see here. Okay, so these are the clamps for the exhaust. Just like the Traxta lift, I'm not going to unwrap these right here, but these are some spacers for the rear shock absorber, one for each side, and they are unique to each side. These appear to be at face value very similar to the spacers that Traxta lift used. So basically the main component of this lift, and there's a total of 4 of these, so there's another 2 in there, is there's going to be spacers that sit on the coil spring in the front strut, and then spacers in the springs in the rear. And these are, of course, going to be 3.5-inch spacers, to match the lift itself. This is a drop bracket for the front of the differential. And in this particular lift, you're actually dropping the rear differential. And I believe these are the spacers for it right here. Now, the nice thing about dropping that rear differential a little bit is you're going to reduce the rear CV axle driveline angles. I've not heard anybody complain about any CV axle issues in the rear. It does come with 2 extended rear brake lines, which is nice. It does come with 2, I believe these are shortened sway bar links. The Traxta lift did not require any modification of the brake lines, and buying the reduced sway bar links was an additional cost. I did that when I did mine. There's various bolts and such in here that go to some of the extended brackets and everything. But one thing they include, which I really like, are some cammed strut bolts. And what this allows you to do is to adjust the camber, very precisely, which normally the Siennas don't have an adjustment for. I mean, what people do is they'll loosen up 2 bolts and just kind of, you can kind of manually manipulate the connection between the lower control arm and the front McPherson strut and adjust the camber that way. But these cammed bolts allows for adjustment. So I really appreciate that they included those. I wish I would have bought, because you can buy those on their own, I wish I would have bought a set for my white Sienna. So it's nice that they included it. And in a nutshell, that appears to be about it. But here's kind of one other thing I really want to talk to you guys when it comes to these lifts, because there was some, I don't know how to say they're hidden costs, but costs that I personally didn't consider initially that are important to bring up. Now, sorry about that. Let's go over here to my box of parts that I'm collecting. So because I'm going to have it all apart, unless you had clear records that it had been previously done, it just makes sense to replace the rear shock absorbers, which I have here. These are KYB brand. From what I've read on the forums, these are essentially OEM. My one side of my rack and pinion, the boot was torn, so I bought a reboot kit. And down here in this box down here, I went ahead and bought 2 KYB shock absorber inserts for my front struts. In this case, I am going to have to compress the existing spring and add them onto the new one, which adds some complexity. But I wanted a very particular brand, KYB also, because they're supposed to be closest to OEM. And so I'm going to take on that extra work. Now, this is kind of going to those additional costs. The lift kit is about $800 to get. They weren't super expensive, but it is a notable extra cost between the shock absorbers and the strut inserts. That was about another $400 to $450. Now, when you go to buy the Journeys lift, they have 4 recommended items that they recommend getting. One is I've opened it, but it's a CV axle rebuild kit. If you guys recall, when I talked to Mike at Journeys and mentioned people's discussions about failing CV axles, his argument, which may or may not be true, but I'm going to take his word for it, at least initially, is that, a lot of people are putting these on older cars. The CV axles were already in bad shape, and that's why they were failing. And he recommends that you obviously replace worn CV axles, or if the CV axles seem to be good, to repack them, which I talked about a little bit earlier. So I bought that kit. It's about $100. Remember I was talking about that differential bushing? So I'm going to replace that when I do mine. I have no record of that ever being done. That's about $60. And spacers. If you're going to put a lift on the van, you're going to probably want to put some bigger tires on. I don't know if you actually need to use the spacers, though there has been some anecdotes that you do to put on the 245 65 17, which kind of seems to be the largest tire, or the most common large tire in what I have. But I'm going to put on some spacers. It'll also give it a little bit of beefier look, and those are 1 inch. And I said 4 things, but I think it was 3 things. So I don't have it on hand, but I ordered it. There is an aftermarket company who made, it's a little hard to describe. I'll show you guys next week when I do the install, but it will kind of allow you to graduate and lower that driveline angled. And I think between that and replacing that bushing, I'm hoping I won't have any problems. I'm going to repack the CV axles. I have no indication that they're bad. I don't know if they're original or not, but I have no indication they're bad on this van. You know, maybe it's just a wear item. Now I'm going to do the install myself. I'm fortunate in the sense that I have a space to do it. I have the tools, and though I don't consider myself a great mechanic per se, I do think I have enough experience, especially since I did the tracks to lift on my white one, and that seems to be working out fine to do this lift. If you fit those criteria, I highly recommend that you do your own lift. One thing, this is anecdotal, but one thing I kind of noticed is a lot of people who said that they would not do it again, also, not all of them, but many of them seem to also complain about the initial installation being botched or something. You know, some of them didn't buy some parts that they wish they would have known about. And, you know, and just in my own experience, you know, I don't really like having people work on my cars if I can at all control that. And, you know, I have suspect that at least some of the people who had some continuous problems did so because, you know, the install wasn't done properly, or, you know, certain items were not replaced that were worn and probably should have. So next week's video will be the actual install video. I know I rambled a lot, but I do think this is some important information, and I hope it's helpful. Actually, one more thing. Let me show you guys just a few things to look for. Like I said, this van was a one owner, other than myself now, of course. And basically the people did all the work, or had all the work done primarily at the dealer, but to a small local shop after a little while. And yeah, they just weren't the kind of people that worked on cars. And, you know, this kind of comes back to I think there's a real benefit to doing the job yourself when you can. I have no indications there's any damage, and I think all of the things that were said to be replaced were in fact replaced. But it was like little sloppy things. So like I had to go to the junkyard today and find this cover. One of the mechanics, God knows when, just ripped it off. It was actually broke right down here, and they just left the pieces. This cover was gone. Not a big deal. But what did bother me was, you see this engine mount right here? All right, where I'm touching here. It's going to be a little hard to see, but there's two brackets. You could see one there, and then there is one right here that connects. Sorry about that. It's a little hard to see here, but basically it was two additional brackets that were part of the engine mount. Some mechanics, some point in time, took those brackets off and never replaced them. I didn't have them. I was able to find them at a junkyard, thank God. But you know, just sloppy work. I crawled up underneath it. Again, nothing that I think is super critical, but there was a couple heat shields that had not been screwed back down. There was a bracket that's going to be a bitch to get. Sorry, excuse my language. It's going to be really hard to get to. That's tucked up underneath there that holds the power steering lines, and that's just dangling. Whoever did some work down there at some point in time unbolted it and never bolted it down. You know, the battery on this had just been replaced like a month or two prior to me purchasing it, and the bracket that secures the battery, that was just missing. So the battery was basically just floating in the engine compartment, hooked up to the battery cables. Fortunately, I was able to buy one of those and replace it. But my point is I think everything's fine. I have no indications that anyone did any damage or they didn't do work that they said they did. You know, all the fluids, you know, this thing had been, at least on paper, really well maintained, and you know, all the fluids are clean. I mean, I think it had been replaced, and when I kind of look around the engine, I do see parts and pieces that do appear to have been replaced. But it just kind of bothers me, that sloppiness, and you know, I guess my point to all of you is, if you're buying something used, you know, just think about that. You know, look around. I mean, would it have prevented me from buying it? No. But, you know, I do think it's important to fix that stuff. So, anyways, guys, thanks for watching. I really hope this was helpful and kind of gave you some insight out to this world. Thanks again.